Section 3.3 deals with derivatives of products and quotients. Now, all the problems that we found the derivatives of thus far have only had problems that are separated by plus or minus signs. So none of them had products and none of them had quotients. And when they did, what we had to do was rewrite. So we were never able to handle something like f of x equals 2x times x squared plus 1 unless we rewrote this. So what we're going to learn today is how do we handle products and how do we handle quotients within problems. So the product rule is where we're going to start. And the product rule says the following. If you're given two functions, f of x times s of x, the derivative of f of x times s of x is going to be f of x times the derivative of s of x plus s of x times the derivative of f of x. So it is the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. So the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. So let's go ahead and practice doing this on the next few problems. So I have f of x is equal to 2x times x squared plus 1. And I want to use the product rule to do this. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to label my first function and my second function. So I'm going to say that 2x is my first function and that x squared plus 1 is my second function. And then I'm going to take the derivative of each one. So the derivative of the first function, f prime, the derivative of 2x is going to be 2. And the derivative of the second function, s prime, well, the derivative of x squared plus 1, the derivative of x squared, again, we bring that 2 to the front, so that's 2x to 1 less. 2 minus 1 is 1. We don't write 2 the first. And then plus 1, the derivative of that plus 1 is 0, and we don't need to write that either. So the derivative of x squared plus 1 is just 2x. So let's find the derivative of f. So we know that f prime of x is going to equal the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. So just plugging in with the information that we've already written here. The first is equal to 2x times the derivative of the second, well, the derivative of the second is 2x, plus the second, well, the second is my x squared plus 1, times the derivative of the first, well, the derivative of the first was just 2. And I am fine if you want to stop here. You can enter in an answer like this in my math lab. It's completely appropriate for your homework. I don't need you to simplify any of these things. I don't want you to simplify any of them. When we need to simplify, we will. But the algebra can get really hairy in a lot of these problems, so I prefer you leave it this way. If you want to simplify, all you would do is distribute all your terms and combine like terms. So I'll just show you how to simplify it if you want to, but again, I prefer that you don't, because if you do make a mistake within your simplification, I will have to deduct points. So if we were to simplify this, if I multiplied 2x times 2x, I'd get 4x squared. Plus, if I distribute my 2 to both x squared and 1, I would get 2x squared plus 2. And then if I combine like terms, I get that f prime of x is equal to 6x squared plus 2. So again, if you simplify and make a mistake, I will have to deduct points. So if you can go ahead and just not simplify unless you really have to, then I would just leave it as what we boxed. All right, let's do the next one. F of x is equal to 5x squared plus 1 times 2 square roots of x minus 1. So the first thing we want to do, just like last time, is label my first. So my first function is going to be 5x squared plus 1. And label my second. So I'm going to label my second function as 2, and instead of the square root of x, I'm going to write x to the 1/2 power, because we know that the square root of x is the same as x to the 1/2 power. So 2x to the 1/2 minus 1. And then I'm going to find the derivative of the first and the derivative of the second. So the derivative of the first, well, again, this is just power rule. 2 times 5 is 10. Raised to 1 less, so it's x to the first power. The derivative of 1 is 0. The derivative of my second function, 1/2 times 2 is 1. I don't need to write the coefficient of 1. X, 1 less. 1/2 minus 1 is negative 1/2. The derivative of negative 1 is 0, and I don't need to write that. So I'm ready to go. Again, I'm following that same pattern. F prime of x is going to equal the first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. So plugging in with the information that we know, f prime of x is going to equal, well, my first is that 5x squared plus 1. The derivative of my second is x to the negative 1/2 plus the second, which is my 2x to the 1/2 minus 1, times the derivative of the first, and the derivative of the first is my 10x. So f prime of x is going to equal 5x squared plus 1 times x to the negative 1/2 plus 2x squared minus 1 times 10x. Let's go on to example 3. Now, example 3 is tricky. Be really careful when you're doing your derivatives. Make sure that you're paying attention to all the terms. Now, notice in example 3, I've got some plus and minus signs here. So I might think, well, I don't have a product. But if we look carefully, right here we have e to the x times the natural log of x. So this first term right here is actually a product. So that first term is going to need the product rule applied to it. So if I apply the product rule to this first term, again, I know that my first is going to equal e to the x, and my second is going to equal the natural log of x. And I know that I'm going to need to find the derivative of my first and the derivative of my second. Well, the derivative of e to the x is going to be e to the x times the derivative of x. Well, the derivative of x I know is 1. If I multiply e to the x times 1, I get e to the x. So the derivative of the natural log of x we know is going to be the derivative of x. Well, the derivative of x is 1 over x. So if I'm just finding the derivative of that middle portion, f prime of x is going to equal, again, it's going to be that first times the derivative of the second plus the second times the derivative of the first. And then it's going to be the derivative of the other two terms. So we can't forget the derivative of those other two terms. We got to make sure that we're putting it all together, that we're not missing any of the pieces. So let's go ahead and find this derivative. Well, f prime of x is going to equal, again, my first is e to the x. The derivative of my second is 1 over x plus the second, which is the natural log of x, times the derivative of the first. Well, the derivative of the first I know is e to the x. And then I need to find the derivative of the other two terms, so I have to do those two before I can finish this derivative. So what's the derivative of 1/5 x to the 5th? Well, again, that's just the power rule. 1/5 times 5 I know is 1. I don't need to write that. And then x to 1 less, so 5 minus 1 is 4. The derivative of negative 28 is 0, and I don't need to write that either. So then this is the derivative of my function.